Before we share this extraordinary story about sacrifice, reunion, and the profound cost that military families pay in service to their country, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. What you are about to witness represents one of the most emotionally overwhelming moments ever captured on television, a reminder that behind every service member stands a family who serves alongside them through separation, uncertainty, and the daily anxiety of having a loved one in harm's way. Throughout the history of military service, families have borne the invisible burden of deployment, managing households alone, raising children without their partner's presence, and living with the constant awareness that their loved one faces dangers that most civilians never encounter. The story of what occurred during a Family Feud taping in June 2024 demonstrates how public platforms can become spaces for honoring military sacrifice, how reunion moments carry emotional weight that transcends individual families to touch universal experiences of separation and return, and how one family's surprise would create a moment so powerful that it would render even the most experienced television host completely unable to maintain professional composure. What happened when Army Captain David Martinez walked onto the Family Feud stage while his family believed he was still deployed in the Middle East would create one of the most widely shared and emotionally resonant moments in modern television history. David Martinez was 36 years old and had served in the United States Army for 14 years when the events of this story occurred. He had enlisted at age 22 immediately after completing his bachelor's degree in engineering, motivated by a combination of patriotic commitment and desire to serve something larger than himself. David had deployed multiple times during his military career, serving tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and various other locations where American military presence was required. His service record was distinguished, marked by commendations for leadership under pressure and dedication to the welfare of the soldiers under his command. David had risen through the ranks to become a captain, leading a company of approximately 100 soldiers and bearing responsibility for their training, readiness, and welfare during both garrison and deployment operations. David's wife, Sarah Martinez, had been his partner through all 14 years of his military service, having married him shortly after his initial enlistment. Sarah worked as an elementary school teacher, a career that provided both personal fulfillment and practical benefits, including a schedule that aligned reasonably well with their children's school attendance and the flexibility that military spouse life often required. Sarah had managed multiple deployments during their marriage, each lasting between 6 and 15 months, during which she effectively functioned as a single parent while also managing the constant underlying anxiety about David's safety. Military spouse life had required Sarah to develop resilience, self-sufficiency, and the ability to maintain household stability for their children, despite the disruption and stress that deployment created. David and Sarah had 3 children: Emily, age 10, Jacob, age 7, and Sophie, age 4. The children had grown up as military dependents, experiencing the unique challenges and benefits of that lifestyle. They had moved multiple times as David received new assignments, requiring them to adapt to new schools, make new friends, and leave behind established connections. They had experienced their father's absence during deployments for significant portions of their young lives, missing him during holidays, birthdays, and ordinary daily moments when his presence would have provided comfort or guidance. The children had learned to manage the fear that came with having a parent in combat zones, though their understanding of the specific dangers varied according to their developmental stages. David's most recent deployment had begun 11 months prior to the Family Feud taping. He had been assigned to lead his company during a deployment to the Middle East, where they supported ongoing operations in a region characterized by persistent instability and security threats. The deployment had originally been scheduled for 12 months, with an expected return date approximately 6 weeks after the Family Feud taping occurred. Sarah and the children had been managing this deployment with the same resilience and adaptation that had carried them through previous separations, counting down the days until David's scheduled return and maintaining connection through video calls, emails, and care packages sent across thousands of miles. The Family Feud application had been submitted by Sarah approximately 8 months into David's deployment. Sarah had conceptualized it as an activity that would give the family something positive to anticipate during the final months of David's absence, and that would create an experience they could share with him through photos and video once he returned. The application described their family composition, David's military service, and the context of his current deployment. Sarah had been transparent that David would not be able to participate due to his deployment, but had hoped that she and the children, along with her sister and brother-in-law, could represent the Martinez family. The producers had been moved by the application and had selected the family specifically because they wanted to honor military families and the sacrifices they made. What Sarah did not know was that David's command had approved his early return from deployment due to a combination of factors, including the successful completion of his unit's mission objectives and his exemplary service record that warranted consideration for early redeployment. David had been informed approximately 6 weeks before the scheduled Family Feud taping that he would be returning home earlier than originally planned. Military officials, in coordination with Family Feud producers, had developed a plan to surprise Sarah and the children with David's return during the show taping. The coordination required significant planning and security considerations, but all parties involved recognized that creating this reunion moment would provide meaningful recognition of military family sacrifice, while also giving the Martinez family an unforgettable reunion experience. David had returned to the United States 3 days before the Family Feud taping, completing required processing and medical screening before being released for leave. He had maintained communication discipline with Sarah during this period, conducting their scheduled video calls from locations that appeared to be his deployment site, but were actually staging areas in the United States. The deception was necessary to preserve the surprise, but created emotional difficulty for David, who was eager to reunite with his family, but had to delay immediate contact in order to create the surprise reunion. Military family support personnel and Family Feud staff had worked together to coordinate logistics, including David's transportation to Los Angeles, his accommodation prior to the taping, and the precise timing of his entrance during the show. The Martinez family arrived at the Family Feud studio with Sarah, the 3 children, Sarah's sister Rachel, and Rachel's husband Michael comprising their team. The children were excited about the television appearance, but also dealing with complex emotions related to their father's absence. Emily, at 10 years old, was old enough to understand the significance of her father missing yet another family event and struggled with feelings of resentment mixed with worry about his safety. Jacob, at 7, oscillated between excitement about being on television and sadness that his father could not participate. Sophie, at 4, had limited understanding of deployment timelines, but frequently asked when her daddy would be home and whether he would be able to watch her on television. The taping began with standard Family Feud format and introductions. Steve Harvey, who had been informed in advance about the planned surprise, approached the Martinez family with particular attention and respect. When he learned during the introduction segment that Sarah's husband was deployed and that the family was participating without him, Steve expressed appreciation for military family sacrifice in a way that felt genuine rather than performatory. He asked Sarah how she managed deployment and single parenting, and her response about taking things one day at a time and focusing on maintaining stability for the children resonated with audience members who understood the challenges military families faced. Steve asked the children what they wanted to tell their father, and their responses were heartbreaking in their simple honesty. Emily said she wanted to tell him she was proud of him, but also that she missed him every day. Jacob said he wanted to show him his improved reading skills. Sophie said she wanted him to come home. The Martinez family competed through several rounds of the main game, performing adequately, though Sarah's distraction was evident to those who knew what she was managing. Balancing the game show requirements with her daily responsibilities and the emotional weight of deployment had created a challenging combination. The children participated with varying degrees of engagement, their young ages making sustained focus difficult under the bright lights and pressure of television production. After the Martinez family won the main game and prepared for fast money, Steve Harvey received a signal from producers that the surprise was ready to be executed. Steve addressed the Martinez family with a seriousness that departed from his usual lighthearted game show demeanor. He told Sarah that before they proceeded with fast money, there was something important that needed to happen. He said that military families made extraordinary sacrifices that most Americans never fully understood or appreciated, and that the separation required by deployment created hardships that deserved recognition and honor. He told the children that their father was serving with courage and distinction, and that his service protected freedoms that allowed families like theirs to live safely. Then Steve said something that would begin the sequence of events that would render him unable to speak and would create one of the most emotional moments in television history. Steve told the Martinez family that while they had been preparing for their Family Feud appearance, something unexpected had happened. He said that David's unit had completed its mission successfully and ahead of schedule, and that David had been granted early return from deployment. Sarah's expression showed confusion mixed with hope, uncertain whether she was understanding correctly what Steve was suggesting. Steve continued, saying that David was no longer in the Middle East, but had actually returned to the United States several days ago. Sarah began to cry, still not fully comprehending what was being communicated, but beginning to recognize that something significant was occurring. Then Steve said the words that would change everything. He said that David was not just back in the United States, but was actually present at the studio right now, and that if Sarah and the children turned around, they would see him. The audience, which had been informed moments earlier about what was about to occur, erupted in applause and cheers as David Martinez walked onto the Family Feud stage in his military dress uniform, having been positioned backstage waiting for his cue to enter. The reunion that followed was raw and overwhelming in its emotional intensity. Sarah, who had been standing near the podium, immediately ran toward David, covering the distance between them in seconds. She collided with him with such force that David had to brace himself to remain standing, and they embraced with the desperate intensity of two people who had been forcibly separated for nearly a year and had endured the constant fear that they might never see each other again. Sarah sobbed into David's chest, her body shaking with the release of months of accumulated stress, fear, and longing. David held her tightly, his own tears flowing freely, his face buried in her hair as he breathed in the familiar scent of his wife after 11 months of absence. The children's responses reflected their different developmental stages and processing capacities. Emily, the oldest, stood frozen for several seconds as her brain attempted to reconcile the impossible sight of her father standing on the stage when she knew he was supposed to be thousands of miles away in a dangerous place. Then recognition and relief crashed through her hesitation, and she ran to her parents, inserting herself into their embrace and wrapping her arms around both of them, while crying so hard that her entire body shook. Jacob followed immediately after Emily, attaching himself to his father's leg and holding on with the fierce grip of a child who had missed his parent, with an intensity that he lacked the vocabulary to express. Sophie, the youngest, took longer to process what was happening, but when she recognized her father, she began screaming, "Daddy! Daddy! Daddy!" repeatedly while running toward him, her 4-year-old legs carrying her as fast as she could move. David knelt down, despite still holding Sarah and Emily, creating space to pull all his children into his embrace simultaneously. The family stood together in a tight cluster of intertwined bodies, all of them crying, all of them trying to touch David to confirm that he was real and present, rather than an image on a screen or a voice on the phone. The reunion was not neat or composed, but rather messy and visceral, filled with tears and incoherent attempts at speech and the kind of physical connection that comes from people who have been starved of each other's presence for too long. Steve Harvey stood approximately 15 feet away from the reuniting family, and the cameras captured his response in unflinching detail. Steve's face showed an expression of such profound emotion that it was almost painful to witness. Tears poured down his cheeks as he watched the Martinez family reunion unfold. His mouth opened as though he intended to speak, but no words emerged. He removed his glasses and covered his face with one hand, his shoulders shaking as he cried. Steve Harvey, a man whose career was built on his ability to speak, to react, to maintain control of a television production, found himself completely unable to function in his professional capacity because the emotional weight of what he was witnessing had overwhelmed his ability to maintain any separation between his role as host and his humanity as a person moved by profound human experience. The production crew made the decision to let the reunion continue without interruption, allowing the cameras to simply document the family's moment rather than attempting to direct or manage it for television purposes. The audience remained standing, many people crying themselves as they witnessed a scene that touched universal human experiences of separation, longing, and the relief of reunion. The moment stretched on for several minutes that felt simultaneously endless and far too brief, with the Martinez family gradually beginning to separate enough to look at each other, to ask questions, to begin the process of re-establishing connection that deployment had interrupted. David spoke to his children individually, telling Emily how proud he was of her for being so strong and helpful to her mother, telling Jacob that he had missed him every single day and could not wait to hear him read, telling Sophie that her daddy was finally home and would not have to leave again for a long time. He held Sarah's face in his hands and told her that her strength and love had sustained him through every difficult moment of deployment, and that coming home to her was everything he had dreamed about during the long months away. Sarah asked him repeatedly whether he was really home, whether this was truly happening, unable to fully trust that the separation had actually ended, rather than this being some cruel dream from which she would awaken to find him still deployed. When the initial intensity of the reunion began to settle into something slightly more manageable, Steve Harvey attempted to speak, but found that he still could not formulate coherent words. He wiped his face, took several deep breaths, and tried again, but his voice broke immediately, and tears resumed flowing. The audience watched as one of television's most composed and professional hosts struggled to regain the ability to function, his emotional response making clear that what they had all witnessed transcended entertainment to touch something much more fundamental about love, sacrifice, and the human cost of military service. Eventually, after several minutes and multiple false starts, Steve managed to speak in a voice thick with emotion. He addressed David directly, thanking him for his service and sacrifice. He told David that while Americans often expressed gratitude to service members, most people had no real comprehension of what military families endured during deployment or the courage required to repeatedly say goodbye to loved ones and deploy into danger. Steve spoke about how watching the Martinez family reunion had reminded him that freedom and security came at tremendous cost paid by military families, and that moments like this one deserved to be honored and witnessed because they represented the human reality behind abstract concepts like service and duty. Steve then made several announcements that reflected both his personal response to the moment and broader recognition of military family sacrifice. He declared that the Martinez family would receive the full $20,000 fast money prize regardless of whether they played the round or how they performed, stating that they had already won something far more valuable than money, and that the prize was offered in recognition of their service and sacrifice. He announced that his personal foundation would provide an additional $25,000 to the family to help cover expenses related to David's transition home and to provide some financial cushion during his post-deployment leave period. He revealed that the Family Feud production company was providing an all-expenses-paid family vacation for the Martinez family, recognizing that they needed time together to reconnect and rebuild the daily intimacy that deployment had disrupted. Steve also announced that the show would establish a partnership with military family support organizations to create a fund that would provide financial assistance to military families facing hardship during deployment. He said that the Martinez family's reunion had reminded him that thousands of military families were managing deployment challenges every day without recognition or adequate support, and that his platform gave him both the opportunity and the obligation to direct resources toward addressing those needs. The announcement was met with thunderous applause from the audience and would ultimately result in substantial charitable contributions that benefited hundreds of military families over the subsequent years. The episode that eventually aired included extensive footage of the reunion and Steve's emotional response, edited to capture the authentic power of the moment while respecting the family's privacy and dignity. The production team consulted with military family advocates and mental health professionals about how to present the content in ways that honored the family's experience without exploiting their vulnerability. The final edited version balanced the emotional intensity with appropriate context about military family challenges and the support systems that existed to help families navigate deployment and reunion. The response when the episode aired was extraordinary in both scale and emotional intensity. The reunion clip became one of the most viewed and shared pieces of content in Family Feud history, with tens of millions of views across various platforms within the first week of airing. The comments sections and social media discussions were filled with responses from military family members sharing their own experiences with deployment and reunion, from veterans describing the difficulty of returning home after deployment, and from civilians expressing increased understanding of the sacrifices military families made. Many viewers reported that watching the Martinez family reunion had moved them to tears and had caused them to reflect on their relationship with military service members in their own lives. Military family support organizations reported significant increases in public engagement and donations following the episode's airing. The visibility of the Martinez family's experience created broader awareness about deployment challenges and the importance of community support for military families. Civilian communities near military installations reported increased participation in volunteer programs that supported deployed service members' families through practical assistance with childcare, home maintenance, and other needs that deployment created. The episode had succeeded in making abstract concepts about military sacrifice concrete and personal, motivating viewers toward tangible support rather than mere verbal expressions of gratitude. The Martinez family's adjustment to reunion followed patterns that are well documented among military families, but often invisible to civilian communities. The initial joy and relief of reunion gradually gave way to the challenging work of reintegration as David and Sarah navigated the changes that had occurred during his absence, as the children adjusted to having their father present again after managing his absence for nearly a year, and as the family renegotiated roles, routines, and relationships that had been reconfigured during deployment. David participated in post-deployment health screening and reintegration programs provided by the military, addressing both physical and psychological impacts of his service. Sarah engaged with military spouse support groups that helped her navigate the transition from deployment to reunion, acknowledging that reunion brought its own challenges, even as it resolved the separation. 6 months after the Family Feud reunion, the Martinez family provided an update through a follow-up segment that aired during a special episode. They spoke honestly about both the joys and the difficulties of the reunion period, providing realistic portrayal of military family life that balanced celebration of reunion with acknowledgement of reintegration challenges. David described struggling with hypervigilance and sleep disruption that were common post-deployment experiences, and his participation in counseling to address these issues. Sarah talked about the adjustment of sharing parenting responsibilities again after having been the sole decision-maker during deployment, and about the importance of patience as she and David renegotiated their partnership. The children appeared more settled and secure than they had during the original taping, demonstrating the healing that consistent parental presence could provide. The family spoke about how the financial support from Harvey and the production company had provided significant practical assistance during the transition period, allowing them to focus on family reconnection rather than managing financial stress. They had used the vacation provided to spend dedicated time together without the distractions of work and daily responsibilities, creating new shared memories that helped rebuild their family cohesion. They expressed gratitude for the outpouring of public support they had received and emphasized their hope that the visibility of their experience would benefit other military families who often navigated deployment and reunion without recognition or assistance. 3 years after the original taping, David remained on active duty, but had transitioned to an assignment that would not require deployment for several years, allowing him to be consistently present for his family during a critical period of his children's development. Sarah had become an advocate for military spouse employment and education, using her experience to highlight the career disruptions that military life created for spouses and advocating for better policies and support. The children were thriving with the stability that their father's presence provided, though they carried lasting impacts from the deployment years that would likely influence their development into adulthood. The family had processed their Family Feud reunion as a pivotal moment in their history, representing both the joy of being reunited and the broader sacrifice that military service had required from all of them. Harvey maintained connection with the Martinez family over the years following their reunion on his stage, checking in periodically and featuring them in subsequent content that highlighted military family experiences. Steve spoke frequently about how the Martinez reunion had affected him personally and professionally, describing it as one of the most profound experiences of his long career in television. He said that witnessing their reunion had changed his understanding of military service from abstract appreciation to concrete recognition of the human costs involved. He used his various media platforms to continue advocating for military family support and to highlight the experiences of service members and their families who often remained invisible to civilian communities. The broader cultural impact of the Martinez family reunion extended beyond immediate emotional response to influence public discourse about military family sacrifice and support needs. Policymakers cited the episode in discussions about increasing funding for military family support programs and improving services for deployment and reintegration. Educational institutions developed curricula that included the Martinez family's experience as a case study in military family resilience and the importance of community support. Media scholars analyzed the reunion as an example of how reality television could occasionally capture authentic human experiences that served public education and advocacy functions beyond mere entertainment value. The story also influenced how military homecoming reunions were understood and discussed in public spaces. While surprise reunion videos had become somewhat common on social media, the Martinez family's experience provided context about the deeper meaning and longer-term implications of these moments. Military family advocates emphasized that while reunion was joyful, it also marked the beginning of a challenging reintegration process that required sustained support rather than just celebration in the moment. The visibility of the Martinez family's honest discussion about reintegration challenges helped normalize the difficulties and reduced stigma around seeking support during what was supposed to be a purely happy time. 10 years after that extraordinary moment, when Steve Harvey could not speak as he watched a military father reunite with his family on the Family Feud stage, the impact continued to resonate through the lives it had touched directly and through the broader cultural change it had helped create. The Martinez children, now young adults, carried memories of both their father's deployment and the dramatic reunion that had marked his return. Emily, at 20, was preparing to enter college with plans to study psychology with focus on military family resilience. Jacob, at 17, was considering military service himself, motivated partially by his father's example and partially by desire to continue a family tradition. Sophie, at 14, had limited direct memory of the deployment years, but understood their significance through family stories and the continued impact on family dynamics. David had retired from active duty after 20 years of service, transitioning to civilian life and work that allowed him to remain consistently present for his family while still contributing to national security through defense contracting work. Sarah had completed additional education and had established a career supporting military spouses through employment counseling and advocacy. The couple's marriage had survived the challenges of military life and had emerged stronger through their shared navigation of deployment, reunion, and the ongoing process of building life together, despite the disruptions that service had created. They spoke at military family events about their experiences and about the importance of seeking support, maintaining communication, and extending grace to each other during difficult transitions. The story of what happened when Steve Harvey could not speak as he watched a military father return home, live on Family Feud, ultimately transcended its origin as a surprise reunion moment to become a narrative about sacrifice, the invisible costs of military service, and the profound bonds that sustain families through separation and danger. It demonstrated that television could serve witnessing functions that honored experiences deserving of public recognition, and that authentic emotion could create connections between viewers and subjects that motivated real support rather than passive sympathy. It illustrated that military families deserved not just verbal gratitude, but concrete support that acknowledged the ongoing challenges they faced. For the millions of people who watched David Martinez walk onto that stage and reunite with his family, the moment provided both emotional catharsis and education about realities that military families navigated routinely. It created space for reflection about the human costs of military operations that often remained abstract in public discourse. It motivated viewers toward concrete action, supporting military families in their communities rather than passive appreciation for service. The reunion reminded everyone watching that behind every deployed service member stood a family managing fear, responsibility, and sacrifice, and that honoring military service required honoring and supporting those families as well. If this story has caused you to reflect on the sacrifices made by military families and the importance of supporting them through concrete action rather than merely verbal gratitude, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with others who might be motivated to support military family organizations in their communities or to reach out to military families they know with practical assistance during deployment or reunion periods. The Martinez family's experience and Steve Harvey's inability to maintain composure in the face of their profound reunion remind us that military service affects entire families, that reunion is both joyful and challenging, and that communities bear responsibility for supporting those who sacrifice so much in service to their country.